أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back. This is episode 20 of our series, Muhammad, the man who changed the world. And in our last episode, we spoke about the very difficult events of the Battle of Uhud, the incident of Ma'una and Raji'a, where many of the Muslims, where a lot of Muslims perished during those incidences. And in the context of almost post Uhud, this is also where Surah Nisa was revealed. Now, Surah Nisa, the name of the surah, is the chapter of the ladies. And if you read through Surah Nisa, and many of us would know the ayat, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullaha haqqa tuqatihi, these ayat are from Surah Nisa. It's about being conscious of Allah and being aware of your community and your women folk, your children. And so Surah Nisa deals with a society that has lost many of the menfolk. You have widows, you have orphans, and you have issues of inheritance. And if you read Surah Nisa, this is by and large what Allah is talking about. And it is also in the context of a very vulnerable community now. And Allah is reminding those in the position of privilege, those in the position of power, to care for those less fortunate in your community, the women, the children, the orphans, the slaves. You also find issues of polygamy many times, and we'll talk perhaps a little bit more about polygamy in this episode, controversially. It's not, when you read the ayat of polygamy in Surah Nisa, it's not so much about polygamy, it's about being conscious, being aware and just to those in need, and to deal with a society where there are people that are vulnerable and how you do not take advantage of the vulnerable in society. So one of the big revolutionary things that Islam has brought about was that it empowers women and it gives women rights which were unheard of, not just in the Arabian context, these were unheard of in the world. So things, for example, before Islam, women were inherited, women were property, women were buried alive, women couldn't own their own bodies, let alone own property. She had no say in marriage or divorce. She couldn't really enter into contracts on her own. And that wasn't only from an Islamic perspective, from a Western, Judeo-Christian, European perspective, this was the same. It was only in the last 150 years, maybe 200 years, where women were allowed the rights to own property in their own names. In the past, you'd find that in England, for example, when a woman, if she didn't have a husband, she couldn't inherit, her own from her parents, and so she needed to be married to own property through her husband. Islam, from day one, women were independent in the sense that they could own their own property, they could enter contracts. Very clearly, we know from the hadith that a woman should not be married without her permission. She can initiate a divorce if she's not happy with her husband. She can go and ask for her marriage to be put aside. And very importantly, what was interesting was that inheritance, women were not allowed to inherit pre-Islam. Islam then comes about and gives a share in Surah Nisa. And that's why it's called the chapter of the women, because it enshrines her right in terms of the mother gets an inheritance, the wife gets an inheritance, the daughter, the sister. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not place in the Quran how many rak'ahs they are for Maghrib or Isha or Asr or whatever it might be, but Allah made it very clear what you need to give in terms of inheritance to the women folk. And also, as I mentioned in Surah Nisa, it deals with orphans. Well, how do you deal with them? How do you engage with them? And so this is really a revolutionary chapter. It's a chapter of the Quran that empowers the disenfranchised. It's a chapter of the Quran that speaks to those who are that are vulnerable. Their rights needs to be protected. And when one looks at Islam from this lens, we sometimes get caught up in the do's and the don'ts, the halal and the haram. Islam is a force for liberation. It's a force to uplift the downtrodden. It's a force to help the little guy. Islam really is there as a protective measure and a means to bring about justice in society. Surah Nisa is revealed in the context post Uhud, where there are many of these societal issues that have just come about. And we now look at the Prophet ﷺ from the lens of his own personal life. So this is a good opportunity to talk about him and his wives, and to look at some of the controversies with regards to his marriages. We spoke about Aisha, and we'll speak more about his other wives. So up until this point at Uhud, the Prophet ﷺ, we know, married Khadija, before he migrated to Medina, and she passed away. And then he married our mother Sauda. She was older than the Prophet ﷺ. She was a mature lady. She was a widow. She had lost her husband. She was one of the early converts the Nabi Sallam had just gone through. So he's a widow, a widower and a widow. And this was sort of, both of them sort of could help and comfort one another. And so the Prophet ﷺ married our mother Sauda. They then performed the hijrah, and in Medina, the Prophet ﷺ married Aisha radiallahu anha, and she is the only one of his wives. Take this, people don't realize this. Of all of his wives, every single one of his wives were previously married. None of them were virgins, none of them were young. They were all mature ladies, already being married, having children in many cases. Aisha is the only one that we would say was a young bride. And Aisha is very proud of this, and what we really admire about our mother Aisha is that she wasn't shy to raise these issues. And she asked the Prophet ﷺ, there's a hadith where she says, Ya Rasulullah, if there were two pastures and you had your flock, would you want to pasture your animals on a graze them on grass that has already been eaten and used by somebody else, or would you like an unblemished, pristine, untouched field? And of course, the Prophet says, of course, the pristine field. And she says, that's what I'm like that. All of your other wives have known men before and are not virgins, and I'm this virgin bride. And so she's very proud of her youth. She's very proud of, she's only known him, whereas all of his other wives have had previous husbands, which is again, interesting in its own regard. So the Prophet ﷺ had married our mother Aisha. She was around 19 years old. If you look at the context of everything, although there is dispute around her age, this was just before around the Battle of Badr. Now, after Uhud, a number of other wives would join the household of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ married a lady by the name of Zainab bint Huzaymah. Zainab bint Huzaymah. The Prophet has two wives by the name of Zainab. Zainab 1, Zainab bin Huzaymah, and Zainab bint Jahsh. And so these wives of the Nabi Sallam, we should know them. So certain of the Sahaba, you should really know their names. And amongst that group of Sahaba, everyone should know the wives of the Nabi Sallam, because Allah calls them the mothers of the believers. So in the Quran, Allah says, "O wives of the Prophet, you are not like any other women. You are you are the mothers of the Muslims." And so this is the names of your mothers. So you should follow with me. The Prophet married Khadija, and she passed away, and she was older than him also, as we know. Then he married Sauda, older than him, granny. She's alive. She migrates with him to Medina. Prophet ﷺ marries Aisha radiallahu anha before Badr, and she's, of course, as we said, a young teenager. The Prophet ﷺ, after Uhud, he marries a number of women. He marries a lady by the name of Zainab binti Huzaymah, and her husband had died in Uhud. Not only did her husband die in Uhud, and so she was, a lady that's alone. She was not even from the Quraysh. So her husband, who was from Quraysh, had married her. So she had no tribe in Mecca, no family members, no cousins, no uncles. She embraced Islam and made hijrah. And so when her husband died, she was a foreigner in a foreign land. And she had no extended family. I mean, the other wives that the Nabi would marry, they would be widows, but they would have, uncles and fathers and brothers. So even though the husband died, they would have an extended family. This lady, Zainab, had no family. And she was completely alone, isolated in Medina. Yet in spite of this, she excelled in charity. She excelled in charity to the point where the poor would give her a nickname. She was Ummul Masakin, the mother of the poor. She would have nothing and still share that nothing or that little with whom she could have. And people would comment about her to the Prophet ﷺ and would mention, look at how charitable Zainab is, that she would, there's an example, a few narrations we have of her, is that a poor man came to her house to beg for some flour, and she gave the last of her own, and then she went to bed with nothing. And subhanAllah, giving when you don't have, or giving when you have very little, as Allah says in the Quran, that they are khasasa, they themselves are in need, they give charity when they are in need. This is a high level of iman. Most of us, we give that excess. Okay, I've already eaten my fill for the month, I've paid all my expenses, I've paid all my bills, I've went on my holiday, I've invested some money, now there's extra. Let me give it away in charity, a few rands here to Gaza or to the orphans. Alhamdulillah, that's good, that's beautiful. But the person who prioritizes others over themselves, the needs of others over themselves, this is a high level of iman. And so when the Prophet ﷺ was made aware of this lady, and some people would say, "Ya Rasulullah, this lady gives, and she doesn't even know if she's going to get tomorrow." And then this the hadith that is mentioned here is that the Prophet says, if a person trusts in Allah with a proper trust deserve, if you truly put your trust in Allah, then Allah will give you provisions as He provides for the birds. Every morning the birds leave their nest hungry, and every morning everyone returns filled. That you will not die of starvation, that you will never be diminished through charity, that if you give even your last little bit, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will assist you. And this is sort of that true dependency, that Allah will take care of me. If I take care of the poor, then of course Allah is going to take care of me. And so this lady, in her difficulty, her perseverance, her charity, the Prophet ﷺ proposed to her and asked her to be married, and so that he could care for her as well. And they were married, but we don't know much further about her. She passed away. She passed away within a few months of the marriage to the Prophet ﷺ, and so that's all we know about her. Her name was Zainab bin Khuzaimah. She was a poor lady, and she was a widow, and she was, very much into giving charity. So let's go through the list, and I hope at the end of the episode we get to know at least a number of the wives of the Nabi Sallam. So we know our mother Khadija, radiallahu anha, she passed away in Mecca. Then we know the Prophet married Sauda. She made the hijrah to Medina, so she's with him in Medina. Then the Prophet ﷺ married Aisha. And Aisha and our mother Sauda, they had a very unique relationship. They were extremely different. The one is young, one is energetic, the one is a bit, she's vocal, she's very confident, she's outspoken, that's Aisha. She's a bit mischievous, playful. Our mother Sauda, mature, a lot more shy, a lot more softer. In fact, it's amazing. Mother Sauda is a granny, but she's a lot more soft-hearted, gentle lady. Aisha, of course, is a lot more bold and brave and outspoken. Both priors. Taqwa comes in different ways. Both play their role. Then the Prophet ﷺ married Zainab bint Huzaymah, but she passes away. The next wife the Prophet would marry, and we'll talk of this, a very interesting story. So, as we said, at the end of Badr, Sayyidina Uthman's wife passed away. And his wife was Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet. So Uthman had married Ruqayya, daughter of the Prophet, and she passes away in Badr. We spoke about this. At the same time, Sayyidina Umar's daughter Hafsa, Sayyidina Umar has a daughter Hafsa. Her husband died at Uhud. So Hafsa has lost a husband, and Uthman has lost a wife. Hafsa radiallahu anha is in her early 20s perhaps. And that's another reason to suspect that Aisha radiallahu anha is around this age, because Aisha and Hafsa are of similar kind of age, and they were kind of on a similar wavelength, the way they spoke, the way they engaged. And we know Hafsa was in her early 20s. Her husband had died in Uhud. And Sayyidina Umar looked at his daughter, and his daughter was very much like him. So Hafsa and Sayyidina Umar were very alike. And he saw her daughter almost, she was a confident lady, she was a strong-willed lady, perhaps even a little bit of a stubborn lady, we have from her narrations. And then he saw her, this very strong, intelligent young lady, becoming almost of a shell of herself. She's going in, she's giving herself to worship and fast. She's grieving, she's in a lot of pain. Her husband had just passed away, and she, as a young lady, has now experienced perhaps the first traumatic death, that was close to her. She had tried her best to help her husband when he was injured, during Badr and Uhud, but then he passes away, and she was becoming overcome with grief. And it's mentioned that during this time, mashallah, with her patience, she memorized Quran, and she had thrown herself into ibadah. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu would obviously see his daughter like that. He wanted her to get out of this sort of depression. And so he thought, Uthman has lost a wife at Badr. It's now been a year. By now, Uthman must have gotten over Ruqayya, and Hafsa has recently lost her husband. She's in Iddah, she's come out of it. She's, dealing with the grief. But, side note, in their society, people were not meant to be single. It was very uncommon to find a woman or a man that was single. So here you have a single Uthman and a single Hafsa, they should get married. And so Sayyidina Umar goes to Sayyidina Uthman, and he says, Uthman, I am proposing to you my daughter Hafsa in marriage. Side note again, for a woman to propose to a man, in our day and age, maybe it's socially awkward. We should not think that way. In Islam, if you see someone that is good, you should want goodness for you and your family. So if I have a daughter, and if I see a young man, he ticks all the boxes, he's available, and I think he would be interested, nothing wrong for the man. And of course, one of the duties of the father is to find a good spouse for your daughter, your sister, is to go and ask, brother, are you married? You're not married? What's happening? You have, have the conversation, and it's maybe awkward, but this is care. This is being, caring for the women folk in your family. And so Sayyidina Umar is doing his duty as a dad, and he's going to Uthman, and he's offering his daughter in marriage to Uthman. Of course, he would have spoken to Hafsa, and Uthman radiallahu anh, his response is like, yeah, Umar, I'm very flattered and all of that, but I'm really not looking to get married. Uthman was deeply, deeply saddened by Ruqayya's death. They had a very deep bond. I mean, and again, I'm going off tangent here, but Uthman was late to get married. He was in his mid-20s. In their society, it was quite late to get married. Uthman was kind of awkward when he came to women. He never spoke to them really. And when he's a young companion, the Nabi Sallam almost pushed him. Yeah, marry my daughter, and encouraged him, and almost with the Prophet ﷺ's encouragement, his mentorship, he was able to be a husband and get married, and he was very fond of Ruqayya. The two of them, there's a nice hadith where the Prophet ﷺ is looking at Ruqayya and Uthman, and he's speaking to his adopted son Zayd, and he says, look how cute they are, the two of them. They must have been whispering, giggling, whatever, and he said, look how cute they are. So now Ruqayya passing away, this was difficult for Uthman, and so when he was offered, don't you want to get married? He's like, no, I'm still grieving. He's like, still in his iddah. So it's been a year, but Uthman is still quite cut up, and he's not looking to get married. Of course, for Umar, this was quite, not nice. I mean, who wants to be turned down and rejected like that? But Umar understood, and so he goes back to the drawing board. He sees his daughter struggling and suffering. He wants her to get married to a good man, and so then he goes to someone who, in his opinion, was the best of the best. There's no one better than Abu Bakr. Yes, Abu Bakr is much older than her. Abu Bakr is more along his age, and so Sayyidina Umar asks his friend and say, look, Hafsa is a good lady. She's a pious lady. She's a God-fearing lady. She's just recently lost her husband. And subhanAllah, this is how they would mention that she's a good Muslimah. Oh, Abu Bakr, would you become family with my family? Would you marry Hafsa? And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh says nothing. He is completely quiet and silent. And Umar is like, say something. Abu Bakr just looks away and ignores him. And to Umar, this was completely, disrespectful. To him, this was disrespectful. And he felt so embarrassed and so hurt that he said, I'm going to complain to the Prophet that, to reject my daughter is one thing, but to treat me in this way was completely, really uncalled for. And so Umar goes to the Prophet and he complains, and he says, Ya Rasulullah, it's again, these are men, but it just shows you the reality of life. He says, Ya Rasulullah, my honor, my dignity has been hurt. I offered, I wanted Hafsa to get married, and like the best I could think, the best match for her was Uthman. I would have really loved for her to get married to Uthman, but Uthman said he's not looking to get married. Okay, he's still a bit heartsore that Ruqayya has passed away. And then I went to Abu Bakr and I asked him, I put myself out there. It's almost as if Umar is putting himself out there. And with Abu Bakr didn't even dignify me with a response. At least Uthman was soft about it. Uthman said, no, made an excuse. My wife died. I'm struggling, whatever. Abu Bakr just ignored me. And this is really unacceptable. And the Prophet says, don't worry, Umar. Don't worry. Everything's going to be okay, because Hafsa will marry a man better than Uthman. You wanted Uthman? She's going to get a better husband. And as for Uthman, he's going to get a wife better than Hafsa. They're not meant for each other, but there's someone better for each of them. Umar is a bit confused. What does this mean? And so, but nonetheless, a few days later, the Prophet ﷺ comes to Umar and he says, I would like to marry your daughter Hafsa. Allow me to marry your daughter Hafsa. And Uthman, he calls Uthman, he says, Uthman, come, time's up now. This sad, sulky Uthman, this is over now. Marry my second daughter, Kulthum, mashallah. So the Prophet ﷺ proposed, didn't really ask, he told Uthman, you will marry my daughter Kulthum. And Uthman accepted. Kulthum was very happy. And the Prophet ﷺ marries Hafsa radiallahu anha, the daughter of Sayyidina Umar. And so after this, as the Prophet said, Hafsa will get someone better than Uthman. Hafsa got the Prophet ﷺ. And Kulthum, Uthman got someone better than Hafsa. He got the daughter of Rasulullah, the only man that we know of that married two daughters of a prophet. And even in a few years from now, Kulthum would also pass away. So subhanallah, Uthman would lose both his wives, Ruqayya and Kulthum. In the life of the Prophet, more sad than Uthman, the Prophet would marry all his daughters besides Fatima. And mashallah, what a beautiful statement he makes. He says, when Kulthum had died, he said, I had married two of my daughters to Uthman. And Uthman, if I had a third daughter was available, he didn't have a third daughter, I would have married her to you as well. Twice. And I ask us as sons were married, would our father-in-laws wed one daughter after the other, if we were in that situation? As for Hafsa, she of course becomes the wife of the Nabi Sallam. And Sayyidina Umar, while being very, very ecstatic, overjoyed, happy, he was a bit concerned. He had not felt that him personally and his family was worthy of the Prophet ﷺ. And he goes to his daughter Hafsa, and he knows his daughter is very much like him. Now, Umar is a strong man. He's a very confident man. He's an outspoken man. He has a bit of an aggressiveness. If he believes he's right, he will let you know. And he has an abrasiveness about him. He's not that diplomatically, and he knows this about himself. He's not the most diplomatic person, and he can become quite belligerent if he wanted to. His daughter is a carbon copy of himself. And of course, where Umar is dedicated and devoted and pious, his daughter is exactly like him. And so Sayyidina Umar goes to Hafsa. It's not the words of the Prophet. Sayyidina Umar says to his Hafsa, listen, my daughter, you married the Prophet ﷺ, but remember, he chose you not because of you. He chose you because he wants to honor me and our family. So don't disturb him, don't bother him, don't upset him, don't argue with him. If you need anything, come to me. Yet we'll find in the Seerah that once Sayyidina Umar was arguing with his wife, and in that argument, his wife says something to him. And he was so offended. He said, how dare you speak to me like this? And she says, Umar, why are you thinking so highly of yourself? When I speak back to you, do you know your daughter Hafsa speaks worse to the Prophet ﷺ? She argues with him and she speaks worse to him. And in fact, she gives him the cold treatment sometimes, like some wives, I ignore you. And the whole day would go by, she would ignore him. Umar couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. He ran to Hafsa and he said to Hafsa, is this true? And Hafsa said, Dad, it's not just me. All of us are wives. We like that. He's our husband. We argue, we fight, and so Umar said, please don't do this. Don't do anything to upset him. He's not just any husband, he's the Prophet of Allah. But the Prophet ﷺ never treated his wives or expected treatment different to any other husband. And his engagement with his wives, between husband and wife, and that's the perfection of it. He is a man that we emulate. That how do I engage with my wife when we argue? I look at how the Prophet ﷺ, when they argued, when they lost their temper, when they shouted, he was calm, collected. He would give them their way when they were a bit difficult, and that's the case. And mashallah, our mother Hafsa radiallahu anha, we find that when the Quran was put in book form, she was the custodian of the Quran because she was Hafidh al-Quran. And so when there was a law that didn't allow ladies to practice accounting or law, they couldn't be lawyers or accountants about 100, 150 years ago. In Europe, it was illegal for them. Certain professions, women were not befitting to enter that profession. I even saw, subhanAllah, 50, 60 years ago, certain marathons like in Boston, women could not participate. Women were not allowed to enter into certain things. The Quran, the only copy on earth, was entrusted to Hafsa because she was Hafidh al-Quran and Sayyidina Umar trusted her. And so that is with regards to the Prophet's marriage to Hafsa, the daughter of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhum ajma'een. We'll continue in our next episode with some of the other wives, inshaAllah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.